It is straight up noon, so let's get flying here. I'm Barbara Hopkins, an NEA grant specialist. My partner, Marlon Jeffers, is Center for Great Public Schools teaching fellow out of Iowa, is with us as well and helping. And Betsy Johnson, who is helping us with NEA GPS grant funds, facilitating webinars, are both with us as far as support. Welcome. We are being recorded, and we'll start out with preparing to write a GPS fund grant. We've asked you already, and if you have not, and as people come in, we'll ask them to write their name and affiliates so we're able to know who's here. Please let us know anytime you'd like to ask a question. I like interactivity. Happy to hear from you at any time, so just please question, and we want to make sure you get what you need out of this grant. If there's any questions you're like dying to know right now that we make sure we cover, please go ahead and type them in the chat right now so we make sure to include them. So I wrote down in the chat that I'm Barbara Hopkins from NEA, and what I want to get out of this is understanding member needs in grant application. So go ahead and type in what you would like to make sure to get out of today as well. While they're typing, Marlon, let's go ahead and go on into the next slide, please.
Okay.
Here's the agenda for the day, and if everybody type in what they want to make sure to get out of this, that'd be great. We'll do the welcome and setting the stage we're doing now. We will outline what information and forms there are and how you find them. We'll really detail the process, because the intent to apply, which we call the ITA, the intent to apply, is changing a little bit, so which I think will be a little more thorough and help you. We want you to understand those. Go through the process. Really talk more directly about preparing the intent to apply, because that's the very next step. Make sure you know where the Ed Community site is. Review the schedule for planning, and then any Q&A that you have as well. As outcomes for this, you'll have a better understanding of all those basics of the processes, know what changes and things there are, know where to find the information, again, the opportunity to ask any questions, and we'll give you some hints as you begin to think about the next steps in the process as well.
All right, what we're going to do is take you through some information and some forms, and so you'll be ready to know where those are. First off, if you go to, there's two ways you can get to our grant site. You can go to NEA.org and do a search for grants, or you can just go to NEA.org/grants, and it will take you to a page that looks like this. There are two types of grants. We have the NEA Foundation grants, and then we have the NEA Partnership funding. That's what we're going to be working with today. And so those are the two ways you can get to the site. When we look at that, we have our NEA Partnership funding. It has our explanation of what it is. And we're coming out of the Center for Great Public Schools. We have the partnership grants, and then we have the state and local grants. And so you have some articles along the side that you can see. The site has all the information that you're going to need to be successful with the grant. When we look at that GPS grant programs, the site location, here is the site location you can get to. And we have the Center for Great Public Schools, state and local partnerships, like we talked about in the Great Public Schools, what we call the GPS grants. And so if you get to that site, it's going to tell you where the forms are, even has all the past grant winners. And so you can take a look at that. It has really good information for you before you start your planning the process. The very first one is our GPS funds, the Great Public Schools funds. Those are grants that are $250,000 a year, up to $250,000 a year, up to $750,000 for a 3-year period. So those are our larger grants that we're working with today. The second set of grants are our state and local grants, and they typically run from about $3,000 to $25,000. And so in that same place, you'll see two types of grants. The ones we're talking about today are those GPS funding grants up to $250,000 a year, but there's also state and local projects also, and all the requirements are listed there in that same place. When you get to the site, the first one, you have the GPS 5-year report. That's just newly published this past year, and so there is a PDF file that you can look at that. And then we have the guidelines underneath of that, and those are in a Word document, and those are the guidelines that we'll be focusing on today. And then you have 2 places. You're here for the intent to apply, and the process that we work the intent to apply is that you'll go through the process, you submit the intent to apply, and then you'll get some comments back from Barbara, myself, and Christopher Johnson on how you can make the grant better before the readers look at it. And so that period is through the month of April. And then the other arrow that you see is the GPS fund grant application. So there are 2 places that you'll need to know the intent to apply, so you can get that feedback before you send the final grant into the grant funding. And then, just some information. Since the GPS grants have started, we have funded about over $29 million. And right now, the shots are 1 to 3 or 1 to 4 to get a grant currently. And so the odds are pretty good. And so we think for members, this money is going back to the affiliates, and we think that's a great bargain. And so you have a pretty good chance of these if you follow some tips that we're going to provide you in the next slides.
So I'm going to walk you some through the process and as we get going here. So a couple of notes, just reiterating what Marlon said, those links to the grants we're talking about, we're guiding you specifically to ours, but please know and look at the NEA.org grants overall, because there's $17 million there. Some of what you're working on may fit into some of those other categories too, just as a reminder. And yes, the session is being recorded as well, so we'll send that out later. So on to working with the process. So Marlon showed you these pages. I just want to reiterate that the intent to apply, you have a month-long time you can submit those, April 1st through April 30th. Then we will give you your feedback by May 15th, and then you have until the close of business on June 1st to get it in. So the sooner you get it in April, the sooner you get feedback, the more you can get feedback in order to reach that June 1st deadline. What we're hoping to do today is make sure that you get all the information you need and think about more in depth as to your readiness to apply and what all should be included as well. Here's the things that I really want you to focus on in your preparation, not just for the grant, but for the intent to apply. The key components of that have been the statement of need and the goals and outcomes is what you need to give. So we'll give you examples of statement of need and goals with outcomes, including numbers and results, not just behinds in seats, but also in how are those behinds in the seats doing. But also thinking about the linkages you have internally, externally with partners at NEA. All of those things really help build a strong suit. We'll walk through those. This time we're also strongly urging you to attach a scope of work, a communications plan, and a more detailed budget, because what we're finding is that those may be strong enough to get a grant or not, but also even if you get it, if they're not strong enough, you have to do a lot of work afterwards before you can begin the grant to fill those out. So we're asking people to consider doing those in advance and submitting them, because we think that really gives you a better chance at review and input into that, as well as a better opportunity to get the grant funded if you do due diligence with those. So we're going to walk you through some of those. So with the statement of need, Marlon, I can't remember if this is yours or mine.
It's yours.
Okay, thank you. So really think about what the problem is. What need are you trying to address? And if it's been a researched problem in the past, let's just say, for instance, if you're really trying, what need you're trying to address is more effective teaching. Well, you might be addressing that through having more national board certified teachers. The number of national board certified teachers is not your outcome. It's the effectiveness of their instruction that's more likely to be the outcome. So it's those kind of intricacies and how you would measure them that gives you more support to really think about what is the problem, what is the solution. Frequently you have programs to fit the problem and solution, but all too often the goals and outcomes wind up just being numbers on a certain program. So make sure you identify the problem and the solution, and if that solution has been research-based, make sure to include that data. What data do you have? It could be educational data, it could be educational program data, it could be things from health and safety, justice, the demographics, any of those types of things. So get those key facts in order to help make your case as well as to why you need to do this, what you're trying to address, how solid the solution is or innovative the solution is, and why you think it's going to work, and then how you measure that it does work. In that, think who are the partners, or who should they be? Who cares about certain things? Who cares if there's more effective teachers? Who cares if we have more educators of color, for instance, if you're recruiting educators of color into the profession? Why is that important? So think about those things, and then if it says children of color are more likely to do better in school if they have X% of educators of color serving them, then answer that question in your evaluations too. How do you know that's working? In a 3-year time period, if you're applying for a 3-year grant as an example. So I'll give you another example here. For instance, this is like data that shows the percentage of babies born into poverty. It happens to be from 2013 because that's the most recent I could find at the time in rural. And what I'm pointing out here is look at the number in rural America. It's higher. There's more kids, babies born into poverty in rural America than anywhere else. So this would be a great piece of data if you're writing a grant that's trying to highlight what we need to do in rural America, because poverty is the #1 indicator of success in schools. Then we're really identifying that there's huge problems around both poverty, as well as most people don't recognize that the largest number of minorities in poverty are in rural areas. They think it's an urban issue. So this really points to that not being the case, which helps make the case for a grant that might focus on rural students that are minorities, or getting more educators of color in rural America, as an example. Then here's an example you can come and see later, but it talks about the percentage of students in rural, the number in poverty, how much people are, how the kind of area they're trying to cover. And this in the problem statement, I wrote this out because, again, thinking in this case about a rural situation, how large is the area you're trying to cover? The people reading the grant are not going to know your situation. So not so much to delve into this as a rural example, but how can you paint me a picture? I don't know your state, I don't know your local, I don't know your area, I don't know your students, I don't know your staff. So how can you paint that picture for the people reading the grant that may or may not be educators, and may or may not have a strong union background? How can you paint this picture to know what the problem is? Sometimes people start writing belief statements in there. This is not where a problem cannot be a belief. A problem cannot be what your executive director or president came in and wanted to do. This is not a political statement. It is a, what is your problem? Paint it for me. If I'm the electrician coming out, what light needs to be fixed and what do you know that's wrong with it? Think about it that way. Then thinking about the links that you need to have both internally at NEA and partners is another component I want you to really, really think about. You need to tie into or state how it ties into the vision and mission of your strategic intent of your organization. Every affiliate turns in a plan to their state, or a state affiliate turns in a plan to the NEA. So see how you fit into that. Don't just make it a program that you're doing that's sidetracked from everything else, because it's less likely to be sustainable. So think about what budget and resources you have available. Grants aren't just about extra money to fit into some good idea. they all expect to really be sustainable. So how will you fit that in the long term? How does it fit into that bigger picture? With the affiliate, you should have buy-in from the board of directors and leadership. We talked about tie into the strategic intent. You need to think about what the affiliate will contribute. There is no match required. We're not saying that you have to have X amount of staffing or X amount of money. That ties into this too. But if it's strategic to your affiliate, which it should be, then there should be something that they're contributing it also. And if you're planning on sustaining it afterwards, then there has to be some resources to do that too. So you really need to think about those things as you begin with your letter of intent, with your intent to apply, and in your goals and objectives, and think long term. If you don't know where you're going to be at the end of 3 years, you might not be ready to start now. So you have to think about that. How will members be engaged? How many members? What membership category? Remember, we're NEA, so we're going to care about those types of things, and all of the constituencies will ask those kind of questions. So it's helpful if you have that in advance. And then the other thing that we'll care about and ask about is, of course, the branding of the affiliate and NEA too will be important along the way, and we'll say a little bit more about that. With the team, with the whole thinking about NEA as a family, what affiliate leaders engaged, what members are engaged, what committee members, what caucuses are engaged. Have you visited with NEA staff that are the content experts? If you don't know who those are, we'll help hook you up. But that makes a difference. You know, if people work with NBCT, they know that Jennifer Locke is our NBCT guru, as an example. There are people attached to community schools. There are people attached to restorative practices or restorative justice. So all of those make sense to find out what already exists, so that we're not reinventing the wheel, but rather building on the wheels that have been built already in affiliates or at NEA. Sometimes there's as many as 5 or 6 affiliates who already have money that have been invested in the types of programs you might be thinking about. So it makes sense to build on that rather than start from scratch. Thinking too about the partners in the community, in the business community, the faith-based groups, the nonprofits, the universities, makes a lot of sense, because if you're going to be sustainable and do something different, it'll probably cost more than we may have within our affiliates. So think about those coalitions you can build. Within, like, educational partners, might be school districts. You know, instead of paying to go have workshops someplace, what are you doing to partner with school districts? Are you working with them to get the Title II money, for instance? Because that's where the federal dollars go to local school districts mainly to support professional learning. So if we're doing professional learning, partnering them might be a good sustainability model. Department of Ed, same thing. School board or other ed entities. Who should be around the table as you approach this, so that you just don't get this infusion of dollars for 1 to 3 years and then be right back where you started from? That's what we're trying to avoid.
All right, the next thing.
So let's stop just for a minute and see if there's any questions. So you want to unmute and ask any questions yet, or comments?
Okay, any questions or comments? Everyone's unmuted.
Okay, go ahead.
Okay, we're going to move on to goals and outcomes, and what Barbara was talking about, that statement of need, those NEA links, and those team linkages are very, very important. The next component are your goals and outcomes. And when we look at that goals and outcomes, and from the examples that we've had in the past, this is the area that most people will have to either rewrite or really do not give us really good information. But when we talk about those goals and outcomes, we really want to know the who, what, when, why, how much money you're going to spend, and how you're going to measure it. And Barbara's already talked about, yes, there's numbers in the seats, but how do you impact those numbers? What is the impact of your grant work over time? How is that working as an affiliate? How is it making your members better leaders? are moving from classroom or maybe into an instructional coach position or even an association position. So those are those goals and outcomes that we're sort of looking at. But I am familiar with SMART goals, and I know a lot of special ed people are. But when we look at those goals and outcomes, we really go through the SMART goals and ask those questions. Is the who there? Is the what, why, when? All those kind of things. So we get that picture that Barbara was talking about. We talked a little about how many. Beyond the seats, we talked about those outcomes and how will you know it is working. So you're always evaluating, and when you're working with that grant, you're always coming back to the outcomes to measure. How is your grant working? Are you spending those dollars? And we have some tools that we're going to be showing you later, but these outcomes are very, very important for the grant work. And like we said, these are probably the weakest link many times that some of our grants have. And so, so if you do get something from us about looking at those outcomes, it's pretty common. We were really looking beyond the number of seats, but what those outcomes are long term. Here's an example of program goals. And what we're seeing is that you have this sort of overall program goal. And so it has the who, what, where, why, and when in that example. But then underneath of it, it really has, some people will call them sub-goals or sub-outcomes. But it really has, what are you going to have out of this? Early career educators will share videos on the experience, so it gives us a better picture of what you're doing with the grant over time. And so those are also part of your evaluation process at the end, how you're evaluating your grant. Scope of work. What we find with the scope of work, and we have an example of one right here, and what we're finding out, the people that use that scope of work, and it is optional, but we find the people that do use the scope of work, form, they are the ones that are getting their grants funded. And because there's going to be a narrative of your grant, and then when we see this goal and outcomes scope of work, it really paints that better picture. And remember, when these grant readers, as Barbara said, they don't know your affiliate very well, those kind of things, and sometimes that scope of work really makes your grant clear. And anyone that's used that scope of work has pretty successfully been funded. So it talks about what the goal area is, what are the key activities, and I know some of you on here are familiar with school improvement planning. I call it the school improvement process: who, what, where, why, and when, who's doing what, the time period, what are the benchmarks along the way, who's involved in the process, and we talk about staff and governance, what roles are they playing, and also those partnerships. But it just gives a bit clearer picture of your grant of when you're writing, and they'll go hand in hand. Here's an example of that scope of work. There's your goal areas, and then it talks about selection of mentors process, by what time of year it is, what are the benchmarks along the way. There's our numbers, there's mentors that are going to be members, teacher leaders, professional development committee. So those are the things that we're seeing as part of that leadership program. And then staff and governance, what is their role in the process of this grant? And as Barbara stated earlier, you're really getting that board of directors to understand your grant. It's just not your grant in isolation. When a state affiliate gets this, we want them to be involved in the process and know what's going on, and the scope of work sort of helps with that over time. When we do talk about the budget, we have the budget and communications, and I'll have Barbara take this one over. This is her area. Barbara?
I realized I was muted. Sorry.
Oh, sorry. Okay.
No, that's okay. That didn't work that too well. Just making sure that as you do this, so on the left-hand side on that Ed Communities page, you have each of the forms. And whereas these are optional to attach to the intent to apply, I'd really, really advise you to do that. And if everybody does it, obviously everybody won't be funded. But it just helps with the deep thinking that goes into grant proposal development and makes for better work. So the top is where the forms are. And at the bottom, it's where some examples are for you to look at. So we gave you a little bit of an example, for instance, on the statement of need. You'll be able to see that. You'll be able to see even more on the examples down there for you to walk through as you work on them. And if you start working on that and you have questions, that's the point of the intent to apply. You put that in. You can ask Marlon or I questions. You'll have our emails, but you can put those in the intent to apply, send them in, and then if they're not as clear as, then you get your feedback. The whole point is you get good feedback so that if you make those changes, that will make your proposal just that much better. Obviously, not everyone can get funded. A 1 in 3 or 1 in 4 chance is exceptional odds, but still, you don't want to be in the 3/4 or the 2/3 that don't. But if you have a well-written proposal, you can take this same format that we use and apply somewhere else too, that we can help guide you to. So that's the benefit of doing this, and that's the benefit of having these and doing that in advance and attaching those to the intent to apply. And this is the first time we're suggesting that people do these and attach them to the intent to apply so we can help you with them. So here's some major hints as you begin, right? A lot of people don't pay attention to the deadlines and guidelines. We pointed those out in this presentation for that reason. You must pay attention to the deadlines. You must pay attention to the guidelines. One of the first things we do is that Marla and I and Christopher, we screen the intent to apply to come in. We screen the grants that come in that say, are they meeting the guidelines? Because we're NEA and we do a lot of organizing, some people will put in things. Changing a policy is a great outcome, but if you're organizing for rallies or organizing for school board events to get school board, any of those other things, that's not what these grants are about. So we'd really suggest they don't even bother with your grant because you're not going to fit into what these grants are about. There's other grants on that page that we showed you that you could go to, but that's not what these specific grants are about. So paying attention to the guidelines, paying attention to the deadlines. It's kind of the difference like when people apply for a job and they send their same resume to 100 people and they don't even have the right stuff on there for the different types of jobs. So you really need to be specific about what these are about, which is why we pointed those out. We pointed out in the example around the rural model, don't assume that people reviewing this know your affiliate, your history, your clientele, your schools, your demographics, your program needs, your data, or even best practices. That's what it's your teachable moment where you get to teach them why you're doing what. Don't throw a lot of numbers and everything that aren't as relevant to it about it. The more succinct and targeted you can be, the better. But give them a lesson that's more like in an elevator rather than flying to the moon and taking years. But don't assume they know. Think about the target population. So this is not about what you want to do. It's not about you and that it's what I want to do and I'm looking for money. And this ties into number 4 too. You really need to think about what the target population needs that you're going after. Well, our target population are our students and our target population are our affiliates. So you have to think about those NEA. The 2 primary goals are building stronger affiliates and and making a difference for students. And predominantly we do that through professional development and helping with our member effectiveness in their jobs. So that's the target population. It's not about what a president or exec wants or not about what a board wants and saying this is the focus, because it ought to be about some need and then thinking about what the funder interest is and the other thing. With NEA, it's pretty simple. We want those 2 goals. But also what makes a difference is, are you going to share it with other affiliates? Are you going to be a model? Are you going to make sure and share things on Ed Community so other affiliates find out? Are you going to make sure and market? Because part of this is about making sure that your affiliate name's on it and the sponsored by NEA grants is on, NEA GPS Fund grants is on it, so that the members who are giving us the money to do this know that it's working and we can share those models as well. So that's in thinking about the funder interests that marketing piece is important too, because we're trying to change the face of NEA in add to the face of NEA. We do well on politics and policy, or that's what we're known for. We're not necessarily known for professional practice, which is why our members have given their member dues to this effort so that we can give it to affiliates so they can help with the effort. But we do expect them to share accordingly and to market accordingly. So those two things are important. Proposal development, again, you need to have that research base behind the statement of need. When I just see we're going to have 500 people take a class, so what? You know, you could have 500 people, 500 students in your classroom. It would not mean they're learning a thing. So you have to take it to that next step of how does it help with the student success? How do we know it works? How do we, and it's okay if it doesn't work. We don't need to be afraid to fail. We can try something and it may not work. Then we've learned something from that too. So it's not that there won't be bumps along the way in grants. We need to know that, but we have to find out and know whether it works or not, and then what we're going to do about it. Some people put too much program in, or it's not enough focus. It's just like, here's the kitchen sink. In a proposal, you should write what you're going to do for this money, not what you're going to do in your whole Center for Teaching and Learning or in your whole affiliate. That's not what the grant's about. It's what are you going to do for this money you're asking for? Think about it like you're buying a house. There you have to prove the money you have so you can show you can pay for the house. But you don't also throw in what grandma gave you for Christmas. You know, that's not as relevant unless you really need it for some other reason because you can't sustain it on your own. But when you're talking to us, don't throw the kitchen sink in there because then you have to report on the kitchen sink. We want to know what's the money going for, how's it doing, and how's the money being spent, and how are you working with partners to leverage it. That's kind of it. Sometimes people do programs that program may be great, but it's too small of a program for the money. There's not a good return on the investment. An example, and I always hate to give examples in some ways because I don't mean to disparage anyone, but it's also important, I think, to have an example so you guys understand what I'm saying. If you have nine or 10 people who are going through a residency program, and that's $250,000 a year. Well, for 10 people, for $250,000, that's, my goodness, right? You know, that's a lot of money. So that would not make sense as a return on investment to be very viable if you can't show some way that that's going to impact, that you'll use those people to impact other people, blah, 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 and take it on out. So you have to think about what message you're sending as a return on investment. And you might be able to justify 9 or 10 people going through a residency program because of what you think you're doing elsewise. But we could pay for scholarships for people to go through college to become teachers almost as easily as we could spend it for that and maybe even impact more. So you really have to think about what that from the funder's viewpoint of what's the return on the investment. People make mistakes. They come up with titles to things that include everything, including the kitchen sink as well. So make the title fit the program. You're doing a set, if you Madeline Hunter set or a classroom set, tell us what the title is so we know if we want to read more. Just sticking to the basics is fine. Abbreviations are tough. I can never remember what they stand for, so then I'm frustrated and have to spend more time reading to remember what it's about. So think about the title carefully and as to what the program is really going to be about. Number 9 is really thinking small or thinking more project-based instead of system thinking. This really needs to be a program that's trying to change the way you do business, that makes a difference in the long haul, that really enhances something you're doing and helps it grow. It gives you that extra beast. So that's a really important thing to think about as well. And number 10 is jargon, cutesy acronyms or abbreviations. You know, don't make the reviewers work that hard. If there's a program name that you're using that's an abbreviation for something and that's what you need to do because your board of directors or whatever else, don't make me work too hard as a reviewer. I'm not a reviewer, but don't make the reviewer work that hard, and you constantly see that acronym and you don't know what it means, so they're struggling. Things like NBCT, people will know because that's so very, very common. But if it's something else that's not extremely well known, make sure and don't take a risk. And even if you think it is well known, I'd put it in there several times so that they have that. These are like throughout grant writing history for the last decade. These are the 10 top things that cause people not to get funded, is they're just not thinking from this perspective.
Cindy had a great question.
Okay.
I see that it has to do with who are the readers for the grants, and are there points awarded for different sections? Will the applicant get a report back on the number of points awarded, weak areas if not awarded?
Great. So Cindy, so the readers, they start in a variety of ways, but we read the grants to see if they fit the guidelines. And then we just report on whether or not they fit the guidelines. There's people within NEA and leadership that read the grants that are staff and leaders within NEA that do that and award points for each section. What they do then is they do not send reports back to you. If you are not awarded, you can ask for a review, then a reviewer is signed to you and goes through that with you. Marlon and I both have done feedback for people who've asked. It's surprising people don't ask. If you apply and don't get it, I'd strongly urge you to ask. I always think that's a growth potential to do that we can always learn from. So then they tell you which areas got less points. But also, I know that I read the grant and give you advice, just one grant writer to another, what I might have changed, that they might have picked up from it or not. But I give you both my feedback as a colleague as well as their feedback, what we get based on points. Good question.
And the other part, they never see the points. We don't see
Right.
the points. The only people
No.
here is that oversight committee that sees those. Good question, Cindy.
And Chris, you asked about a person to coordinate. There's two Chris's, sorry, but for a position to coordinate all the work. There is a point in the guidelines that says, I forget how they worded exactly. I think we have it in here, but yes, you can fund a position. The point that the union cares about and NEA cares about is that you don't hire someone who's going to be out of a job in 3 years. So we don't want to set them up for failure or think they're going to be part of this and then not. So you can use money from the grant. There's several ways people have done that. We've talked a lot about this because having someone do the work is kind of important to getting work done. And making sure that, so in some places they'd have like 5 lesser positions that'd be maybe instead of a optional period, or you buy a half-time educator or whatever to do work. And when that happens, then we ask that you have an MOU so we know their rights are covered and those types of things. It's mainly about that. If you're doing a full-time person, we'd ask that you think about the sustainability of the project, and that the union, if you're doing a full-time person, you have a way to pay them at the end of that 3 years, so we're not hiring someone just to then go away. But you may certainly hire staff or a contractor or whatever within the guidelines of your affiliate, with the potential for, you want to fit in the guidelines of your affiliate. If they're doing layoffs, it's really hard to wind up hiring someone else on a contract if you're laying off staff. So it needs to be supplemental, not supplanting. You shouldn't be paying for someone's salary that's there already, and then they're just diverting the funds to another. You can't take money from professional practice and then they take the money they had for professional practice or teaching and learning and give it over to organizing. That's not what these grants are about. So please make sure that doesn't happen. But yes, you may hire staff.
Another question is from Sandy. If you have several different areas you want to outreach in professional development, such as fellowship, social, Jumpstart, national boards, should these be separate grants or they can be rolled in together into one?
That's really becomes one. You're basically building a center for teaching and learning. And so in a Center for Teaching and Learning, those are all things that would usually be part of the programming. So that makes a lot of sense to just have that be the focus. And that's what you write down as your target. And then you have those different programs underneath it, very common. And yes, you can use money for release days or substitutes, or also extended contract time in the summers or Saturday work. Yes, absolutely. We want the members engaged and understand their expertise takes time, so absolutely. We do watch that. Sometimes, believe it or not, people have tried to pay everybody who's on the board of directors to come and do work. This isn't about just filling leadership pocket. That gets a little dicey. It looks a little self-involved. So think about how you're involving people who might not have been involved before, or get them out of the classroom, and just think beyond who might already be there. Optics are important.
Another example that we have found, you get extra points for having an emphasis for early career educator or social justice. And a lot of times people will put both on there, and they'll put everything for early career educator but not say anything about social justice. So if you're going to put the emphasis as early career educator or social justice, make sure that your grant, the scope of sequence, your goals all address both of those. And because that helps, because that doesn't help when you're read the grant and we don't find anything in social justice, but you indicated that. And so we just want you to make sure that you're making sure that the focus that you want for the grant is supported in the work that you do.
Other questions? Good questions.
Yes. Okay.
You can, Chris, you can use the money. Chris asked, can you use money for coordination of multiple state affiliates doing similar work? Absolutely, you can. The trick to that, and people don't always get this, is there's only one lead affiliate that applies. So if you apply on behalf of one other affiliate or 5 other affiliates, you still have to coordinate the reporting and the budget reports. We're not going to turn around and treat it like 6 grants where I'd be contacting all 5 of your partners and you to get the reports. So whoever's the lead needs to do that. We also ask for you to have an MOU with the others so we know what work is theirs and what work is yours, so that if the rubber meets the road and some work's not done, we know who's getting what money and what money's not going anywhere. That kind of like in advance keeps you a little bit off the hook from being the bad guy about that. So, but we want whoever the lead affiliate is that applies to take care of that. If you don't want to do it that way, then you should put in 5 separate grants if there's five affiliates. You only get up to that $250,000 a year for 3 years, total of $750,000. So that's just an important consideration too. Can you do the work for that amount of money with the joint affiliates? There was one we did that was a lot more money. Initially with 9 states, it's been very difficult to manage. So we learned some lessons from that. And just because if you write separate grants on the same topic, we're going to help find a way to help you all attach to and help facilitate that through the next year. We're getting better and planning on doing that. So there'll be ways to connect either way. Hopefully, Chris, that answers your question. If not, let us know.
One other area that I want to comment on is partnerships, how the importance of partnerships, and that's partnerships out of the education world. Many times, we have the school districts or state affiliates together, but those partnerships help your sustainability plan. For all the grants that we've had for long-term sustainability, those partnerships come in handy. And so one of the other focuses that we've not touched a lot on, how are you going to sustain this after the work, after your funding is done? And so that's another thing in the grant that you need to highlight. And how are you going to sustain your program without the funding with the grant after that 3 years or 2-year program that you have? So that's another area that a lot of people don't like to comment on that we see.
Rochelle asked, can grants be used for member stipends to participate in the programs? It depends. It depends. So main thing is back to Marlon's point, thinking about the sustainability. When the grant's gone, are you still going to be able to pay them to participate? If they're already getting substitute pay, if they're already paying a substitute to get out of class, then that doesn't make a lot of sense. There are states who pay for everybody's professional development, and they're paying for the professional development. Do they have money to give stipends as well? It's hard to set that up when that's not very sustainable. So the real big question is the sustainability of that, Rochelle. If it's training so they can go train others, of course we pay for their time and energy. If they're getting college credit for it, because there's things that way, it doesn't make sense that you pay them and get college credit. So there's a lot of what ifs around that. But can people get stipends to participate? Yes, most of our programs don't do that because the people are taking courses to move up pay scales. Yeah, so yeah, I mean, I think and people can put, Rochelle mentioned the stipends just so they can get feedback from the participants to strengthen the program. I think a lot of times we have the tendency to get feedback from them anyway, but if you want extra time with them to get the feedback or to review or anything like that, put it in and it'll be up to the reviewers to see if they see that's worthwhile. There are times that reviewers will fund some of the things in the program, but say we don't like this aspect of it, and then you just don't get the money for that particular aspect of it. So I'd say try it. It's a little bit different model. I'd say give it a shot.
Any other questions?
Okay.
Okay, we'll move on to the next one.
So again, I mentioned before, but I'll say again, when you think of the WIFM as what's in it for me, you think about what's in it for you and your affiliate, but also you really have to think strongly about what's in it for the funder, the WIFF. The strong affiliate is where people miss at times. It's like, this isn't just about doing a program that's a good program. It's also saying, how are you going to engage that member? How are you going to get that person from it? You might get 600 or 6,000 or 60. It doesn't matter. How many people are in a workshop? Workshop might be good. You might even be able to show that it does well when they go back to their work. But how does that build a stronger affiliate? How are you checking? How are you making sure those people go from one time behind in the seat, even if it's a good learning, to really getting so they're engaged at the next step? Doesn't mean they go to politics or policy, but do they become a leader of other workshops? Do they become a trainer of trainers? Do they help develop curriculum? How are they getting involved through the professional practice engagement? How are you building that? How are you attaching them to the larger affiliate? It doesn't just take everybody who's ever been in a class and try to force them into politics and policy, where a lot of our members are saying that's not where they want to go. So how do you do that in order to build a stronger affiliate? That's a big interest of NEA. Pay attention to your funder, any funder. And successful students, great. Teacher becomes more effective. They get more skills. How do you know that that's impacting what they're doing in the classroom? This is only a 3-year grant, not a year long, not a 7-year to make real transformative change is what people frequently need. But thinking about that for what you can do, you can just ask the people's perception 6 months later and see how what they were doing works. NBCT is great at that loop, of learning something, trying it, being effective, coming back around, all those things we should do. So think about how you find out if they're really impacting student success as well, beyond the evaluation at the end of a training. Do they come back for more training? Might be another question. Can they post on ed communities? All of those are ways that we find out what they think after the sale, so to think. How are they letting us know later that it works? What's in it for the funder? Here's the restrictions we talked about. And the question is, what office is the GPS out of? It's the Center for Great Public Schools. So NEA is divided into several different centers, and there's centers for organizing, centers for business, center for communications. Ours is called Center for Great Public Schools. Here's what grants may not be used for. In most grants, they have indirect costs and overhead expenses, so you can't pay for that. Like that'd be thinking about who's running the budgeting and can you pay for part of that? Can you pay for an office in your affiliate office? No, you cannot. Those are overhead expenses. The public relations activities that you do to promote the work that you're doing, that should be part of communications and built in. Count those types of things as a match to what you're doing in your communications work. Legislative programs are not fundable. Politics policy, that's not what we're doing. Capital improvements, that's not what we're doing. Equipment would be a rare thing. If somebody needs a laptop because they haven't had one in the office, it's a new position, you might be able to squeeze in a laptop, but I'd really suggest the affiliate pay for that and you mark it down as a match, as something they're contributing. If they're not even willing to contribute a computer, I'd say you got bigger problems than the grant. But programs or activities covered by other NEA grants, you have that old $17 million on that sheet page we showed you. Ours is a $6 million pocket out of that. If it's covered someplace else, that's a different focus than we are. That's important to know. Excuse me a moment. We talked a little, Marlon, can you take this question, this bullet? Sorry.
Hiring a full-time staff positions. We can't hire full-time staff, but there are parts where you can purchase a person to assist for the grant, to help with the grant and support those positions in the program. But the issue is we'd like to see that funded later after the sustainability of the 3 years or the 2 years, whatever you decide for your grant program. So not to purchase a position during the grant process, but there are ways to assist with that process. I hope I answered that okay, Barbara.
Yeah. Does that make sense to everyone? Don't purchase a current NEA, a current affiliate staff member, but hiring someone, but then just don't leave them hanging like we don't like people to do in unions.
Okay.
Here's who the deciders are. Back to Cindy, a review again. The oversight, I didn't take this the step further. So there's reviewers of the grants, but then it goes to the oversight committee. So the oversight committee is 9 people, like the head of NCUEA, Betsy Pringle, Princess Moss, the vice president and secretary treasurer of the organization is Betsy Becky and Princess are. The head of the National Council for Higher Ed, someone representing the National ESP group. So a whole variety of people are on that oversight committee that also review every grant, see if they agree with the recommendations of the review team or not. Then additionally, whoever's recommended, the NEA president and executive director review them as well. So there's a whole lot of decision makers before these get completed. And that's why it takes a whole month to get responses as to whether or not the grant's been funded, because they take that very seriously and go through all those different channels, being a highly effective team all the way around to think about that. And remember that not all of these people are educators and haven't necessarily spent a lot of time in classrooms or in local or state affiliates necessarily that go through from beginning to end of this process. So be careful of the lingo because of the deciders. And one of the things we always try to say that with Marlon and Christopher and I, or anyone on the GPS fund staff, we are not the deciders. We tell if things fit the guidelines or not, and we give feedback on if we worked with someone, if their reports are due in on time, if they've done good work in the past, those types of things, but we do not decide about the grants, which is important to know when you talk to us, and you get the feedback from us on your grant ITA, intent to apply, as well.
There's a question on, is there a requirement of any number of people of color on the reviewing teams and oversight committee?
I'm sorry, say again.
Is there a requirement of a number of people of color on the review teams and oversight committee?
There's not a requirement. There's certainly a good representative balance.
Okay.
We pay attention. The place too that you can always ask questions. I mean, Marlon and I, but I'll tell you the great thing with Ed Communities, which is mynea360.org, in the group Grants for Great Public Schools, NEA Grants for Great Public Schools, sorry. If you just search grants up in the corner on mynea360.org, you will find this group. You should belong to this group. If you have a question, just ask there. Other people will have the questions as well, and that makes it nice because other people will learn from your question just as they are here on the chat. That's the same page where on the left you had all the key information and documents. On the right you will see further down you'll see there's group files. They're not showing up on this particular screen as well. This webinar will be recorded and we'll make it available as a file on here that you can go back to and see again. So Rochelle, back to your question, you can point them to here and get that, have them get this webinar from the Ed Community site, and then they're able to ask the questions and see other webinars and things too, which hopefully are helpful, and all the forms are here. We give updates, we give reminders of when the ITAs do, we give reminders like of the webinar today, all of those things. It makes it for a real nice flow of the process and to keep updated with things. So reminder of the timelines. April is your month for the intent to apply. Make sure you're ready when you send it in. Review all of those things we've said in here. Highly recommend all of those other components so that you get the best benefit of intent to apply feedback. An intent to apply is not required. You can just send your application in at midnight, June 1st, 2018, and it will get reviewed. It's just been our experience that the more you do this process, the better outcome, unless you're really an exceptionally skilled grant writer. The benefit of the intent to apply, again, is that expert feedback and someone helping you along the way. Those will be reviewed and feedback will be given to you by May 15th. We do that in person, not in writing. We do it either on a Zoom or a telephone call where we go through your intent to apply. And I believe Marlon and I both usually do reviews where we'll have some tracking along the way so you can see where we have suggestions for in the process as well. We're both pretty blunt because then it's hard. If we're too polite, we find, not trying to be impolite, we try to be direct so that you understand what we mean so that your form gets better. That's the best way to say it. So nothing's ever meant to be offensive. We're just trying to be as direct as possible because we're here to be your advocates and be your guides in helping make your proposal better. So we're as direct as possible so you get the best possible outcome. If your light's broken, we tell you your light's broken so that you know the light needs to be fixed. It's that. So May 1st through June 1st is the application. People cannot send it in before May 1st. It's not going to necessarily be the right application. So they need to wait till the link's up between May 1st and June 1st. Getting it at May 1st does not mean it gets reviewed or anything happens anytime sooner. We don't review it until after the application's in, June 1st, 2018 at midnight East Coast time. Don't leave it to the last minute, because if you do and have a technology problem, that can be an issue. Of course, we're not here to be too punitive. So if technology goes out and you have a windstorm in your area, we're not going to be punitive about that, but it's just better to get it in and not stress yourself out by doing it the last minute. You will be notified by August 1st. The reason why it takes those 2 months is because we review all of them and they go through all those 5 layers of processes before you get notified again. We see if it fits. We see what your background and history is. with them? Are all the other ones closed out, or do you have appropriate extensions? Are your progress reports in? It goes to the review team. The review team sends it to the oversight committee. The oversight committee sends it to the executive director and president. They do some checking with other centers to see if the same thing's been applied for or if they're already funding such things. We ask that in case people haven't told us. So they do that kind of due diligence on spending the members' money on these things. And then you get notified by August 1st. Then progress reports are due every 6 months. The benefit also of the communications plan, the budget plan being done during ITA, and the scope of work is literally those become your 6-month reports with a few other questions. It's like, okay, here's the budget. Where are you at on that? Here's the communications plan. How's the report? How's that going? Where are you at with that? Show us examples. Here's the scope of work. Here's where you said you'd be in 6 months. Are you there? Why or why not? How's it going? What have you learned? What's gone well? What's not? Same thing at 12 months and on through the grant. So that makes it a much more smooth, seamless process when we have these things in place. So we're learning and getting better to help you learn and get better too. So hopefully these processes get better. So we said you'd have a better understanding of the basics of all this, how to get the funds, knowing where to find information and deadlines, and how to link with resources, and have an opportunity to ask questions, which you'll have again here, and then get some hints. Hopefully this webinar has done that for you. We're going to pause again to see if you have any questions. Feel free to unmute and ask. I like voices too. Don't know if we've missed any questions.
I don't think so. I think we've kept up with them pretty good.
Great. Okay, let's go on to the next one. I think that's the next question slide. Next, please. So I would like you guys to all either speak or write. Thinking back now to this whole webinar and what we hope you got out of it, and what's a word or phrase that stands out the most for you? Type it in or unmute and say it, please. A word or phrase that stands out from you from this webinar.
Understanding.
There you go.
Complete understanding.
Thank you. And I'll come back and answer any questions that come up. All right.
And I think one of the things that Barbara, Christopher, and I, we really want you to get these grants, and so we try to move you to where you can get, your grant is fundable. And so I think we try to give you as many comments and feedback as we can. And like I said, going through the intent to apply, I think it just helps everybody, and most of them that have been through that process are funded. So I think that's always a positive.
There are basically, I'm going to go ahead and go through this review, then we'll talk more about the questions. Don't let me miss them. So now list how you feel, list an emotion and about what. Like an example for me when I think of grant writing is anxiety about having time to write it. It almost might be another example for me is excitement about the possibilities of a new horizon. So throughout this, where did you feel some emotion, and what was the topic where you felt that?
<clears throat> <clears throat> Barbara, I don't know if you can see. Can't get my scrolling down. Overwhelmed but excited. Is NEA considering any upgrade for the application form so applicants can save and return to partly completed applications? I'm excited to know the application will receive feedback on their intent to apply. And it says yay.
Yeah. So, yes, they are not this round, but the next round will have that. So, yeah, we're working with a new platform that I'm excited about. So, and take one of the next two questions and everybody respond, please. And either say what it means to you to be able to write this grant and get it successfully, or list what your next step is, please. So if everybody do that, that'd be great. While people are answering the third and fourth question, I'll refer back to sustainability. There's actually 4 modules on Ed Communities that walk you through the whole grant process. They're a little bit dated, but the forms might be different, but gives you some ideas for sustainability. There's really only 5 models of sustainability, and I'll talk about those real briefly here. One is that that you bring in enough new members, which would only be true probably in right to work states, that you have the money to support it. The other is that you're building a foundation that can be woven into what already exists, or that the local affiliate or the affiliate will fund it from there on out. Or that you're part of a coalition, you know you need to go get more money. But you should begin, if you're going to need more money at the end, which why wouldn't you if you're growing, then you really need to build that coalition up front and begin with the end in mind. One of the things we did in one of the locals, one of the states is we really blocked out with them on our first site visit. If this program's growing to this extent and at the end of the 3 years and you think it's going to be self-sustaining and not have affiliate budget, 2 things. One, shame on the affiliate, because would they ask any other element? Would they ask policy or politics to go raise all their own money? Probably not. They'd have some baseline. So I wouldn't ever accept that from an affiliate because you're setting yourself up for fail. But we blocked out, basically they need to raise $1 million at the end of that 3 years and have a way to have that money there at the end of the 3 years. So they need to think backwards about how they would possibly do that. Is it a dues increase? Is it building a coalition? Are they not charging for classes now and need to charge? Are they selling products? Are they, what are all these other expenses they have they could do differently? We're going to have a whole series of webinars just on diversifying the funding. Where else can you get grants? Can you partner with the school district to get Title II funds? There's all those types of models that exist. So, but those webinars, if you just type in webinars on Ed Communities in the NEA Grants for Great Public Schools under resources, look for the sheet of webinars and go through their webinars. There's more in depth about sustainability as well. That's one of the biggest things. Marlon, have you been reading these just so we can follow up with anything?
Here, I'm trying to get my mouse up there.
Yeah, looking at current projects, members' needs and requests, and start reflecting, determine what projects should be. And people frequently think, they have to do everything. Again, kitchen sink thought. It might just be the mentoring induction program. It might just be that. It's like, what is the biggest problem you have? Start with the biggest problem, and then it can help you think about what the project needs to be. The biggest problem is that you're losing members and losing educators in the first 3 years. That's the biggest problem that's identified. Then maybe that's what you need to focus on. If there's already a state program about that, you might not need to worry about that. You might go to problem number 2 in your local or state affiliate. Christopher, you said it'd be powerful to develop and provide modules for our members. Do you want to share more about that? Putting him on the spot. Not that one too. So, well, great. Well, we'll stay on for any questions that people want to say. This has been hopefully very positive for you. I hope it is for you. And we'll be here until everybody's off to answer any questions, and just really appreciate your taking the time. I will write in here Marlon Jeffers at NEA.org and bhopkins@NEA.org, or questions about grant processes and development. Our partner Betsy will be helping us with other webinars down the road. So, thank you very much, everybody. If you have any questions, we're here.
So Barbara?
Yes.
Hi, it's Rochelle. So I have a question.
Yes.
Who can actually apply for one of these grants? Does it have to be the local? Can it be a teacher leader? I did just I don't know the answer to this, and when I send these folks this link, I need to know. My guess is it would, of course, it'd be a teacher leader under the umbrella of the local, but does it actually need to be someone that works for the local that has to submit the grant?
The local has to be behind it, because it has to build a stronger affiliate too, which a member can't do by themselves. So yeah, these grants can only go to affiliates.
No. But in terms of who writes it, can the teachers write it for the, like, does the president have to write it, or does the?
No, anybody can write it. It just has to be embraced by and a part of.
Oh yeah, no, that would totally happen. I just wasn't sure who had to actually be who has to submit it.
Right. So no, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. They have to. They will have to check boxes that say that the president, exec, and the board are aware of it and support it, and it aligns with their strategic plan and those types of things, so that it's not just an individual applying for themselves. So there's some questions like that, but no, it doesn't matter who writes it.
Okay, got it. So a couple of teacher leaders could write it for the affiliate, on behalf of the affiliate, and the affiliate would be on board with it. The local president would know it, but they could actually upload it.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you. It's a great webinar. It's very informative. Learned a lot of stuff. So I appreciate you guys. I appreciate the fact of this.
Yeah, good.
Y'all have a good day. I'm going to log off.
Okay, take care, lady. Bye-bye. Thank you.
Thank you, Barbara. Thank you, Marvin.
Thank you, Betsy. Appreciate it.
Thanks, Betsy.
Great.
You helped out a lot.
All right.
Are we done recording, Marlon?
Yep, I'll take care of that.